In that moment, I received some semblance of hope. An opportunity to grieve unalone. And your son took that from me.
Let's talk about why nobody is more interesting than John Wick. The original film released in 2014, and despite its simple premise, managed to stand out enough among action films that it would grow into an entire franchise currently comprised of 4 films, a TV miniseries, and a 5th spin-off film in the works. Since on this channel we like characters and blabbering about them, let's take a look at the formula and character writing in the first film that helped skyrocket the franchise. The film opens with our main character, nearly dead, watching a video on his phone of he and his wife kissing. We then jump back in time to begin our story. We're shown glimpses of John's beloved wife passing away, as well as tidbits of how bright his life was with her, as well as a few mementos he keeps to remember her. We're shown the funeral, given a small vague exchange between John and Willem Dafoe's character, followed by an absolutely gorgeous shot of the cemetery blending into the city's skyline. And quickly after this, we're introduced to the puppy and card his wife left him, explaining that he needed to learn to love something after she's passed. We get a brief glimpse of him connecting with the dog before he has his fateful and unfortunate run-in with the Russians. Some veiled threats are exchanged, and we cut to John driving angrily in the airfield trying to vent some kind of frustration. Later that night, he is ambushed in his house by the Russians. They trash the place, steal his car, and kill his puppy, which I'm not going to show. All of this within the first 16 minutes of the film. He buries his dog, cleans his house, and broods a great deal for obvious reasons, and upon finding his car stolen, leaves the house with angry and cold purpose. He visits his old friend Aurelio's chop shop, trying to look for the car. We get our first hint of the sleeping dragon that is or was our main character through Aurelio's reaction of punching Yosef in the face after learning that he stole John's car and killed his dog. Aurelio receives a call from Yosef's father, Vigo, inquiring why he struck Yosef.
I heard you struck my son.
Yes, sir, I did.
Yeah, may I ask why?
Yeah, well, because he stole John Wick's car, sir, and, killed his dog.
Oh.
The next scene follows suit and gives us another character-driven indication as to how much Yosef has stepped in it, and how serious it is that he has crossed John Wick. This scene that reveals the truth and urban mythos of John Wick is so good that I think it sets the high watermark for the whole franchise. Movie lovers really enjoy the concept of show don't tell, the premise being that utilizing the visual components of your medium or the organic interactions of characters are often more compelling and more engaging than rattling off critical information unnaturally in your dialogue or with text on the screen. This premise applies to books as well, and has long since been a way to compact a very broad artistic goal in a very small phrase, and this scene is a masterclass in walking that line, because Vigo's telling us directly how dangerous John Wick is. He's giving us John's backstory directly. In many ways, it's just an information dump, but it's entirely organic. It's justified within the story, believable, and is intercut with the perfect imagery of John exhuming the tools of his long-buried past life. And that's pretty much the entire setup of the film, all handled very swiftly within the first half hour, with even a few minutes to spare. This is where John's rampage begins, and this is where John's character development ends, for the most part. There's some self-doubt and moral contemplations that pop up in the next films, but aside from giving an old friend a way out of his rampage, John's character in this film is pretty flat. He loved his wife, but now she's gone. He had a last gesture from her that he could use to rebuild himself after her loss, and that was taken from him too, in an almost comically cruel act of villainy. So now there's every reason to return to his past ways. Fueled by righteous vengeance and a painful emptiness, it's really hard to have any perspective other than Yosef deserves to die and John deserves his revenge. It's a very simple story and is short and utilitarian by design to make room for the action. The film uses some of the most cliché justifications possible to guarantee that the audience is as eager to see people die as John is. So if John by design is pretty flat, and his actions are immutably justified by some of the most cliché misfortune and cruelty you could write, how is it that nobody is more interesting than John Wick? Well, that's because the title of this video is a bit of a deception. In 2021, Derek Kolstad wrote a film titled Nobody that is, in many respects, very similar to his previous massive success, John Wick. Both films begin with a tease of the ending. Both films involve a man who has retired from a life of mass murder that, after being given a sufficient reason, returns to this life of mass murder. Both films even involve Russian crime families as the main antagonist, but the films are different. Watching them is a different experience, and one of the biggest reasons for that is how the films write and use their main characters. John Wick's first act is largely about the events of the film happening to John, the loss of his wife, the following depression and lack of purpose, the note and puppy his wife left to him, the cruelty visited upon him by Riki Theon. All these happen to John to justify his return to mass murder. Other than loving his wife and being lost after her death, and the speech Viggo gives us about his godlike status as a bringer of death, we really aren't given much about John as a person. By design, the wheels of the film spin regardless of if there is any depth to John at all, and in many ways, the less we know about John, the better. Kolstad is a big fan of westerns and enigmatic main characters, and this feels like a pretty direct inspiration. Whereas Nobody functions in a very different way. The way the film introduces us to its main character, Hutch Mansell, is in immediate contrast to John Wick. Instead of being shown sad, foggy memories of a lost loved one, we see Hutch in a rut of frustration and the banal loop of his day-to-day life. The film efficiently establishes this tension within the first 5 minutes and even baits a fight scene during a home invasion where at the last second Hutch decides against attacking the thieves. This, followed by the constant mockery and emasculation from other characters, plants the possibility that our main character might even be a big pushover.
In the golf club? Did you even take a swing?
Heard you had some excitement last night.
Yeah, it was just,
Man, I wish they'd have picked my place, you know?
Now he says that you had the drop on one of them. Why didn't you take him out?
It isn't until about 16 minutes into the film, during a conversation, that we get confirmation that Hutch's actions during the break-in were not hesitation, but restraint. A restraint that is wearing very, very thin.
empty.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Now I know why you didn't do what you didn't do. I know what you're thinking about, and I wish you wasn't. Don't do nothing stupid, you hear me?
A few scenes later, and his daughter tells him that her kitty cat bracelet is missing and was in the bowl that the robber stole from. Hutch immediately sets off, having finally been given a reason. After some searching and a veteran recognizing Hutch's tattoo of an unmatched 7 and 2, we finally arrive at the thieves' house and it's go time. Until it's not. They have a kid, they have no idea about the kitty cat bracelet, he's made a mistake coming here, his frustration is peaking and he is resigned to it. Until... What follows is the most satisfying first fight scene in any movie I've ever seen. After spending almost 30 minutes building frustration, focusing on the repetition of normal life and the incessant unsolicited advice from family and neighbors, and teasing the start of a rampage 2 separate times, the film finally gives our main character a good enough excuse to have a sweet release.
I'm gonna fuck you up.
Similar to John Wick, where the high watermark is when we are finally told what our main character is capable of, this scene is the highlight of Nobody, but the way we've reached it is very different because Nobody is not a case of the film happening to the main character, as is the case of John Wick. Nobody is a film about the main character finally giving in to what he is, what he wants, and what he needs, regardless of the impact it may have on the rest of his life. The action in Nobody is not righteous or vengeful, as it often is in John Wick. In Nobody, the violence is selfish. Even when a violent response could be justified, such as defending his home from the Russian counteroffensive, Hutch burns an obscene amount of Russian mob money known as the Obshak because he knows it will force the conflict to an exciting climax, even if he offers his new enemy a hollow exit strategy. This makes Hutch Mansell a far more compelling character than John Wick. The action in both films is well shot and fun, but knowing Hutch is practically getting off on this shit after years of restraint, and that he is participating in accelerating it and isn't just responding to random acts of targeted cruelty, makes the experience a different kind of cathartic and adds character depth that can't be found anywhere in John Wick. However, as true as it is that Hutch Mansell is a more interesting character than John Wick, it doesn't mean that John Wick is riddled with character writing laziness or mistakes, or that the film is worse just because John is a far simpler character than Hutch. And that's because the most fascinating personality in John Wick is that of the world they inhabit. The quite magical world of crime the film explores, or as they refer to it in the film, the life, is what sets it apart from movies like Taken, The Equalizer, Red, Skyfall, or any of the dozens of films about middle-aged super badasses being forced back into action. The world of John Wick gives the film a mythological feeling, from the way that Viggo frames John as a once slumbering titan that's been awoken by Yosef, to the continental feeling like a criminal's Olympus, to the little details that I love the most, such as the body disposal cleaners being led by a frail old man dressed in black that accepts 1 coin per body, and is named Charlie, being a very cute Charon reference, which is frankly a far more fitting Charon analog than the actual character that they've named Charon in the film. who for my money aligns a bit more closely with Hermes and his more eclectic job titles that include Messenger of the Gods, Protector of Travelers, and even sometimes encroaching on Charon's turf by moonlighting as Psychopomp. The world building of John Wick is so wonderful that the characters work best when painted more like flat mythological figures rather than real people, allowing them to add to the greater painting of the world rather than the other way around. Conversely, in Nobody, any and all world development that's attempted is not particularly interesting, and because the film is about a selfish indulgence in repressed desires, the world and characters that are not Hutch or his newfound nemesis feel ornamental at best because they're serving the greater painting that is Hutch. But both films achieve something new within the genre, and in ways that I appreciate very deeply because they are studies in what can be achieved when you add fantasy and mythos, or real humanity and flaws, to this genre that is all too often samey and forgettable. Which leads me to the conclusion that the title of this video is more than just a deception, it's a lie, because both of these films are extremely interesting and in my opinion outstanding within their genre for different reasons, and if you want a very fun and short writing study, I highly recommend both of these films, because they're perfect examples of how a little something extra can make all the difference.